Two children without eyes. The setting sun cast long shadows over the quiet suburban neighborhood. Ivy, a young woman in her 20s, was walking home after work. The streets were unusually empty, and the air carried a strange chill. As she turned the corner, she noticed two figures standing under a flickering streetlight. They were children, a boy and a girl, around 8 or 9 years old. They stood unnaturally still. Ivy wheezed. Steps slowed as she approached them, a growing sense of unease with each step, but it was the only way for her to get home. The children simultaneously turned their heads, and Ivy's breath caught in her throat. Their faces were pale and expressionless, but what struck her most were their eyes, or rather, the absence of them. These children had smooth, empty voids where their eyes should have been. The eye sockets were dark and hollow, an abyss that seemed to pull at her very soul. Ivy's heart pounded as she stopped a few steps away from them. The boy and girl began to move, their movements unnaturally stiff. They stepped towards her, their empty sockets somehow feeling like they were staring menacingly. Ivy wanted to run, but her legs felt rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear. The children reached out, their hands pale and cold. They lightly touched her, sending a chill through her body. As their fingers met her skin, images flooded Ivy's mind. She saw dark hallways, old, decaying houses, and a profound sense of sadness and fear. The disjointed images, like mismatched puzzle pieces, kept flashing through her mind. Suddenly, the children let go, and the images stopped. Ivy stumbled back, gasping for air. The boy and girl stood there, silent and still. The flickering streetlight cast eerie shadows on their faces, making their hollow sockets appear even darker. Ivy ran, her heart pounding. She didn't stop until she reached her home. Slamming the door shut, she leaned against it, trying to calm her frantic breathing. The encounter had left her shaken, and the images from those children still lingered in her mind. That night, she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the eyeless children and the haunting images they had shown her. She knew she had to find out who they were and what had happened to them. The next day, Ivy returned to the spot where she had seen the children, but they were gone. She began asking around the neighborhood, describing the children to anyone who would listen. Most people shook their heads, saying they had never seen or heard of such children. But an old man at the local library seemed to know something. His eyes widened in recognition when she described them. He told her about a tragic accident that had happened many years ago. 2 children had died in a fire at an old house that once stood on the very street where Ivy now lived. Their bodies had been found, but their eyes had mysteriously gone missing. The house had been abandoned and eventually demolished, but it was said that the children's spirits still haunted the area. Ivy felt a chill run down her spine as the old man spoke. She realized that the images she saw were the children's memories, their plea for help. Determined to soothe their spirits, she decided to search for the remnants of the old house. It took many days of searching, but she finally found it. It was a patch of overgrown grass, hidden behind a row of new houses. As she stood there, she felt a presence around her. The air grew colder, and she knew the children were near. Ivy knelt down and began to dig. She uncovered charred pieces of wood, the remains of the old house. And then she found a small, scorched box. Inside were 2 porcelain dolls, their eyes missing. Ivy's, Heart ached as she realized these were the children's cherished toys. With trembling hands, she placed the dolls back in the box and whispered a prayer for the children's souls. The air around her seemed to lighten, and she felt a gentle breeze brush her face, as if in thanks. Relieved, she knew she had done the right thing. The eyeless children were no longer bound to their tragic past, and perhaps she had helped them find their way to the afterlife. The Curse of the Top Students. The school stood tall and intimidating with its Gothic architecture, old and worn, with ivy creeping up the walls. The atmosphere always felt gloomy. The walls were adorned with old portraits of past headmasters and notable students, their eyes seemingly following anyone who passed by. The floor creaked with every step. Elena, a studious girl in her late teens, was seated at a desk near the back of the classroom, immersed in a book. The room was empty except for her, and the silence was suffocating. The school had a bookshelf dedicated to the history and legends of the school over the years. It was quite large and sparked her curiosity to learn more. Elena searched through the archives, looking for information about a mysterious curse she had heard rumors about. While reading an old history book about the school's founding, she came across a leather-bound book, aged and ancient. Unexpectedly, a page with a paper bookmark revealed a section about the curse of the good and top students at the school. Years ago, the school had been plagued by a series of unexplained events. The top students began disappearing under mysterious circumstances, their academic excellence seemingly attracting a dark force. Shadows moved on their own, and strange whispers filled the hallways. Elena read about how the curse started with a student who made a pact with an unknown entity to achieve academic success. The price was their soul, and the curse had haunted the school ever since. Elena left school to go home. She started to feel scared because she was one of the top students at the school. She hadn't witnessed anything herself, so everything seemed vague to her, caught between reality and fiction. As she descended the stairs, the eyes of the portrait seemed to follow her, glowing faintly and eerily in the light. Elena entered the bathroom to splash water on her face, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. She looked up into the mirror and saw a shadowy figure standing behind her. She spun around, but the bathroom was empty. Her breathing became rapid, and she quickly left. Elena sought refuge in the science lab, hoping to find a logical explanation for the strange events. As she flipped through a textbook, the lights flickered and went out. She heard a low growl and saw beakers and test tubes rattling on their own. A cold breeze brushed past her, sending shivers down her spine. Panic. Elena ran down the hallway, her footsteps echoing loudly. She heard whispers of her name, growing louder and more urgent. She stumbled and fell, the whispers now a cacophony of sinister voices. Beware. Your turn will come. Desperate, Elena burst into the headmaster's office, hoping to find answers. The office was dark and cluttered with old papers and books. The headmaster's chair slowly turned to reveal a shadowy figure with glowing red eyes. Elena screamed and backed away, tripping over a stack of books. Elena fled the building, her heart pounding. She looked back at the school, which now seemed even more menacing under the moonlight. As Elena ran across the school grounds, she felt a presence chasing her. She reached the gates and looked back one last time. There was a dark shadow peering out from the window. Safe back in her room, Elena tried to calm herself, but the events of the night kept replaying in her mind. She opened her laptop and began writing about the curse. determined to warn others. As she typed, she felt a strange sensation. A shadowy figure lunged towards Elena. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure grabbed her arm, and she was suddenly overwhelmed by a flood of terrifying visions. Students being dragged into darkness, their faces twisted in silent screams, and the entity that started the curse grinning maliciously. Elena saw the student who made the pact, standing before a dark figure with glowing eyes, signing a blood-soaked contract. Elena snapped back to reality, the shadowy figure gone. She was left shivering, a dark mark on her arm where the figure had grabbed her. The screen faded to black, and the only sound was a whisper. "Good luck. If you don't leave, you will be next." She didn't know if the curse would follow her, but with such a warning, she decided not to stay another minute. The next day, she left and transferred to a different school. Not long after, the school was abandoned due to rumors, and students gradually left.
The crazy mother on campus. Exam season had arrived, and normally our school library would close, but because of the exams, the school decided to keep it open until midnight. My house is not far from the school, so instead of studying at home, I prefer to study in the quiet and peaceful library. That day, I left home at 6 o'clock, engrossed in my studies, and didn't realize that it was already 10 p.m. I had never stayed this late before. The ticking clock was loud, each second echoing in the emptiness, signaling that it was nearly midnight. Strangely, there were hardly any students studying at that hour. It was absolute silence. I finished my work and headed home. The library is at the end of the hallway, so as usual, I walked down the long, dark corridor of the school. But today, I felt an unusual chill in the air. It was empty and the silence was suffocating. I walked through the hallway and quickly approached the exit. I walked fast, the sound of my footsteps echoing ominously. The once familiar campus now felt strange and frightening. The trees swayed gently in the wind, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out. The path narrowed as I entered the school garden, the lights becoming fewer. A sudden loud snap of a branch made me stop dead in my tracks. I spun around, heart racing, but saw only shadows. Exhausted and hungry, I could barely walk properly. I kept my eyes on the ground as I walked. From the darkness, a figure emerged. It was a woman walking with a strange, crippled gait. Her legs seemed twisted, making it difficult for her to walk. She moved like a zombie. Now I was close enough to see her clearly. Her clothes were torn and filthy, her hair hanging in tangled clumps around her ghostly pale face. My heart pounded in my chest as the woman limped toward me, her eyes staring as if she wanted to pounce on me. I backed away, fear enveloping me. The uneven footsteps of the woman grew louder, echoing in the empty night. She pursued me relentlessly. I ran aimlessly until I reached the school parking lot, desperately searching for a place to hide. The parking lot was eerily empty. I hid behind a car, my breath coming in ragged gasps from the exhausting chase. But she did not tire. She searched for me with a crazed determination. From my hiding spot, I saw the woman moving past the cars, her head turning from side to side, searching. I felt truly terrified and breathless. The woman stopped near my hiding place. I held my breath, afraid to make a sound, and prayed she wouldn't see me. Thankfully, she just stood there, scouting the area, and then turned and continued moving. Seizing the opportunity, I bolted from my hiding spot, running towards the dormitory. The lights of the building were a beacon of hope. but the woman's footsteps grew louder behind me. I didn't care about anything else. I just ran, fearing for my life. I reached the dormitory entrance, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keypad. I could hear the woman's labored breathing right behind me. Finally, the door clicked open, and I rushed inside, slamming it shut behind me. I leaned against the door, gasping for breath. I looked through the glass, but the woman was nowhere to be seen. The campus was dark and silent. I collapsed onto my bed, my mind racing with the terror of what had just happened. The image of the woman's pale, haunting face was etched into my memory. The next morning, I was determined to find out more about what I had experienced. I asked the groundskeeper who tended to the school's garden. He looked quite old, so I thought he might know something. I asked him, and he said that in 1998, there was a 32-year-old woman who had a 20-year-old daughter who also attended this school. One day, while playing with her friends, the daughter mysteriously had an accident on the school grounds and died. The mother couldn't bear the thought that her daughter might have been bullied or something terrible had happened to her that she didn't know about. Losing her daughter drove her mad, and she would appear and disappear erratically. I decided I would never walk alone on the school grounds again. For the sake of my safety, the danger was too real and could strike at any moment. We met a crazy clown in the woods. In the summer of 2016, amid bizarre clown sightings across the USA, I stayed at our friend Milo's house, which bordered a dense forest. After a day of movies and snacks, we felt restless and decided to take a late-night walk. Armed with flashlights, we ventured into the forest at 2 a.m., our conversation mingling with the sounds of the night. By 2:45 a.m., we reached a clearing with an old, creaky playground, until Milo pointed towards the old restroom building. There, partially illuminated by our flashlights, stood a man in a tattered blood red clown suit. Unlike the playful clowns from childhood, this one was menacing. His face was pale, with smudged makeup and a wide, eerie grin. His hair was a tangled mess of red and black. Paralyzed with fear, we watched as the clown stared at us, his head tilted to one side. Then, he started walking towards us, slow but deliberate. Panic surged through us, and we instinctively backed away, trying to decide whether to flee or confront the figure. Suddenly, the clown broke into a sprint.
Help me!
That was all the motivation we needed. We turned and ran as fast as we could back towards Milo's house, the forest path a blur beneath our feet. After what felt like an eternity, we burst out of the forest and onto the road in front of Milo's house. We glanced back and saw the clown standing at the forest's edge, partially illuminated by the streetlight. He had stopped running but was still watching us, his sinister grin visible even from a distance. In his hand, he held a big rusty axe. We didn't wait to see what he would do next. We bolted into Milo's house, slamming the door shut behind us. Milo's parents were out of town, so it was just the two of us, alone and terrified. We gathered in the living room, each of us trying to catch our breath and process what had just happened. Milo turned on the front door camera, and we watched the screen in tense silence. The clown appeared at the edge of the frame, walking slowly down the street towards the house. He stopped in front of the gate, looking around as if searching for something. My heart sank as he approached the front door, his gaze fixed on the camera. He leaned in close, his face filling the screen, and made a series of grotesque, mocking gestures. He waved the knife slowly before stepping back and disappearing down the street. We spent the rest of the night huddled together, too scared to sleep. The image of the clown's twisted grin and the knife haunted our thoughts. We didn't tell anyone about the encounter, fearing disbelief or ridicule. To this day, the memory of that night lingers, a chilling reminder of how a seemingly innocent adventure can turn into a nightmare. We often wonder what might have happened if we hadn't run back to Milo's house, and the unsettling question of who or what the clown continues to haunt us. Horror story: The Strange Man with Red Eyes. This happened 6 years ago when I was working the night shift as a security guard in an old office building. Since then, I have never worked the night shift again. That night, the pale moonlight cast an eerie glow over the deserted scene, creating a chilling atmosphere. Around 3 a.m., I was doing my final patrol before ending my shift. As I walked through the dark hallway, I heard strange footsteps. I looked around, but saw no one. The footsteps continued, seeming to come closer to me. I started feeling uneasy, trying to stay calm and continue my work. But just as I reached the security room, the door suddenly opened. A man with disheveled hair and bloodshot eyes walked in. He was wearing a long black coat and carrying an old suitcase. There was no one around, and I couldn't understand how he got into the building at this hour. I swallowed nervously, trying to speak to him.
Do you need any help?
I asked, my voice trembling. The man didn't answer right away. He just stared at me for a long moment. Then he opened his mouth, his voice raspy like the wind through a crack in the door. I need to go to a very special place, a place you will never forget. I didn't understand his meaning, but I responded anyway.
I can't leave the building during my shift. Can you specify the location?
The man smiled in a strange way, his thin lips curling up. All right, take me to the basement. I was surprised, but didn't want to cause trouble, so I nodded and led him there. We stepped into the elevator, the air inside becoming oppressive. When the elevator doors opened at the basement level, a cold draft swept in. The man stepped out first, and I followed, feeling more anxious. He stopped in front of a small room, its door long locked. I didn't remember ever seeing this room before. The man pulled out an old key from his coat pocket, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. I stood outside, not daring to follow. I've reached my destination, he said from inside. Thank you for guiding me. I turned to leave, but suddenly he appeared right in front of me, as quick as lightning. He placed his hand on my shoulder, gripping so tightly that it hurt. Remember, you have helped me, and I will remember you. I screamed, trying to break free, but I couldn't. A sharp pain shot through my chest, and I collapsed. My eyes gradually closed. I gradually saw the door of the room closing before my eyes, accompanied by his satisfied, creepy laughter. And then I fainted. When I opened my eyes, I was lying in a hospital bed. The doctor said I had a heart attack, but was lucky to survive. I recalled the man and asked everyone around about him, but no one had seen him, and the security cameras recorded no one but me. From the video extracted from the camera, it seems that I was talking to myself in front of the hallway door and then collapsed on the floor. It seems that I was taken to the hospital by the neighbors. I was haunted by his final look and his mysterious words. I could never forget that raspy voice, and every time I remember, I feel a chill down my spine. I had once guided a mysterious man, and it had changed my life forever. The creepy secret of the cheap motel. On our anniversary, we had a memorable time in every sense at an old suburban area. The bus ride took forever, and before we knew it, the sun was setting. Since we traveled by bus, it took more time, and soon it was evening. I didn't realize it was festival season there, so it was quite expensive and crowded. We found a very cheap place to stay, although it was a bit hard to find. I think the problem was that we entered any nearby place without considering the location. We prepared a simple dinner, shared stories, and then picked a movie to watch together. Suddenly, Min told me she started feeling a bit tired and dizzy. Probably exhausted from the whole day, we decided to go to bed early to be ready for our plans the next day. I quickly fell asleep. However, Min found herself tossing and turning, unable to find a comfortable position and mumbling something softly. When she finally started to drift off, she told me she felt a strange sensation taking over her. Suddenly, my eyes opened for no reason. I usually sleep deeply and rarely wake up in the middle of the night unless someone shakes me awake. But my girlfriend, who was sleeping next to me, turned over, and I woke up due to her movement. Around midnight, Min started tossing and turning in her sleep. Her face was contorted with discomfort, and she began sweating profusely. Her skin was pale and clammy, and her breathing became strange and irregular. I opened my eyes slightly and saw my girlfriend get up and walk to the bathroom. Her movements were stiff, almost puppet-like, as if an invisible force was guiding her. At that moment, I saw a dark shadow following her. It wasn't her shadow because it had no hair on its head. Instead, it was a black figure with hands and feet moving independently, not matching her movements. It had no eyes, nose, or mouth, but it resembled a human figure. I don't believe in ghosts or supernatural phenomena without scientific evidence, but I definitely thought something was wrong. When I fully woke up, I jumped out of bed and ran to the bathroom where my girlfriend had gone. I tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. Then, I heard the laughter of a middle-aged man from inside. I remember it clearly because I wasn't drunk and was definitely alert. Slowly turning the locked doorknob, I shouted my girlfriend's name. "Open the door." I stood outside the bathroom, anxiety engulfing me. But there was no sound from inside, and the door remained closed. I still can't recall if the next part was a dream or reality. The laughter grew louder and more terrifying. I hesitated, but finally mustered the courage to open the door, only to find the bathroom empty. I thought long and hard about what had happened and went back to bed to try and collect myself. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped, and I felt a chilling sensation run down my spine. I nearly fainted when I saw it. My girlfriend was standing on the bed, staring at me with wide eyes as if possessed by something, then gave me a terrifying smile. I had been dating her for nearly 2 years, but had never seen such a horrifying smile before. Her eyes, once warm and loving, now held a chilling emptiness. She laughed again, the sound echoing through the room, sending shivers down my spine. I grabbed her shoulders and shook her hard, but she just fell back into sleep. I couldn't sleep that night and waited until morning with my eyes wide open. Min woke up and advanced towards me, her laughter becoming louder and more hysterical. I recoiled, my mind scrambling to make sense of the situation. The previously cozy bedroom had transformed into a nightmarish enclosure. I tried to reach Min, hoping to pull her out of whatever trance she was in. She went silent, her body collapsing to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut. I immediately took her to the hospital because she had fainted, feeling less afraid in the daylight despite not believing much in the supernatural. I began to clean up and quickly got out of the rental. As we left the rental, I asked her if she remembered anything from the previous night, but she seemed unaware of what had happened. I didn't tell her anything because I thought she would be scared if I detailed the events. But now, after 10 years, I suddenly recalled the incident and started researching the rental. It turns out that there had been several murders and suicides there over the past few decades. The media didn't directly mention the name of the place, but I'm certain it's the right one after. Reading some reviews about the accommodation. Horror Story Nightwalkers. I used to work at a small hotel on the edge of town. The hotel was quite peaceful, nestled between dense woods and a long, deserted road. After a hurricane swept through the town, business slowed down significantly. I worked the night shift from 6 o'clock p.m. to 2 o'clock a.m., often without seeing anyone for hours. The only sound in the empty lobby was the ticking of the old clock on the wall. One night, I was sitting in the break room, sipping warm coffee and watching the security monitors when I heard a deep voice call out from the lobby. I got up and went to the front desk. There was a man standing on the other side of the glass partition. He was tall, with wild hair and a strange, jittery energy about him. He asked for some towels, so I handed them to him through the opening under the glass. He grabbed them with such force that it made me flinch, and then he left without saying another word. Curious, I watched him on the security monitor as he walked down the hallway, rubbing the towels against his face and neck. It was bizarre, but I shrugged it off and returned to the break room. About 10 minutes later, I heard his voice again. This time, he was back at the front desk, banging on the glass. "My key card isn't working," he shouted. I asked for his room number, but he responded strangely, saying something like 2C Pui, which didn't match our room numbering system. When I told him that, his demeanor changed. He leaned close to the glass, his eyes wide and wild. "I'm going to kill you," he said with a cold smile. I froze as he repeated it, louder each time, until he was nearly screaming. I grabbed the phone and dialed 911, shouting at him that the police were on their way. He stared at me with that twisted smile, mocking me as I spoke to the dispatcher. Finally, he left the hotel, disappearing into the night. I was shaken but relieved that he was gone. I decided to stay in the lobby for the rest of my shift. When my relief arrived at 2 o'clock a.m., I hurried outside, eager to get home. The cold night air bit at my skin as I walked through the empty parking lot. Suddenly, I heard a noise behind me, like someone walking on tiptoes. I turned around, and there he was, hiding behind a car. His eyes followed me from the shadows, and he whispered, "I'm going to kill you." Panic surged through me. I looked around, trying to decide what to do. My only chance was to run to the nearest house with a light on. I sprinted to the door and pounded on it, screaming for help. Just as he grabbed me from behind, the door flew open, and the homeowner shouted, scaring him off. I collapsed in relief as the homeowner called the police. The police arrived, but he had already disappeared. I identified him on the security footage, but they never caught him. To this day, I still wonder if he's out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for another chance. Horror story: The Strange Man with Red Eyes. This happened 6 years ago when I was working the night shift as a security guard in an old office building. Since then, I have never worked the night shift again. That night, the pale moonlight cast an eerie glow over the deserted scene, creating a chilling atmosphere. Around 3 a.m., I was doing my final patrol before ending my shift. As I walked through the dark hallway, I heard strange footsteps. I looked around, but saw no one. The footsteps continued, seeming to come closer to me. I started feeling uneasy, trying to stay calm and continue my work. But just as I reached the security room, the door suddenly opened. A man with disheveled hair and bloodshot eyes walked in. He was wearing a long black coat and carrying an old suitcase. There was no one around, and I couldn't understand how he got into the building at this hour. I swallowed nervously, trying to speak to him.
Do you need any help?
I asked, my voice trembling. The man didn't answer right away. He just stared at me for a long moment. Then he opened his mouth, his voice raspy like the wind through a crack in the door. I need to go to a very special place, a place you will never forget. I didn't understand his meaning, but I responded anyway.
I can't leave the building during my shift. Can you specify the location?
The man smiled in a strange way, his thin lips curling up. All right, take me to the basement. I was surprised, but didn't want to cause trouble, so I nodded and led him there. We stepped into the elevator, the air inside becoming oppressive. When the elevator doors opened at the basement level, a cold draft swept in. The man stepped out first, and I followed, feeling more anxious. He stopped in front of a small room, its door long locked. I didn't remember ever seeing this room before. The man pulled out an old key from his coat pocket, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. I stood outside, not daring to follow. I've reached my destination, he said from inside. Thank you for guiding me. I turned to leave, but suddenly he appeared right in front of me, as quick as lightning. He placed his hand on my shoulder, gripping so tightly that it hurt. Remember, you have helped me, and I will remember you. I screamed, trying to break free, but I couldn't. A sharp pain shot through my chest, and I collapsed. My eyes gradually closed. I gradually saw the door of the room closing before my eyes, accompanied by his satisfied, creepy laughter. And then I fainted. When I opened my eyes, I was lying in a hospital bed. The doctor said I had a heart attack, but was lucky to survive. I recalled the man and asked everyone around about him, but no one had seen him, and the security cameras recorded no one but me. From the video extracted from the camera, it seems that I was talking to myself in front of the hallway door and then collapsed on the floor. It seems that I was taken to the hospital by the neighbors. I was haunted by his final look and his mysterious words. I could never forget that raspy voice. And every time I remember, I feel a chill down my spine. I had once guided a mysterious man, and it had changed my life forever. Horror Story Haunted Tracks. The legend of the haunted tracks had always been a topic of eerie fascination in our small town. The story went that, decades ago, A tragic train accident had occurred on the old, abandoned railway line just outside town. Many lives were lost that fateful night, and it was said that the spirits of the victims still lingered, haunting the area. As a skeptic, I never believed in ghosts or haunted places, but that changed one cold winter night. I was driving back home after visiting a friend when a heavy snowstorm hit, making the roads nearly impassable. I decided to take a shortcut through the old railway crossing, hoping to save some time. The wind howled, and snow fell in thick, blinding sheets as I navigated the narrow, winding road. The visibility was almost zero, and I had to slow down to a crawl. As I approached the old crossing, my car suddenly stalled. I tried to restart it, but the engine wouldn't turn over. Frustrated, I got out to check under the hood, the biting cold stinging my face and hands. As I fumbled with the engine, I heard a faint, distant whistle. I froze, remembering the tales of the haunted tracks. The whistle grew louder, and I saw a light piercing through the snowstorm, heading straight toward me. Panic set in as I realized it was an old steam train, barreling down the tracks at an alarming speed. I abandoned my car and tried to run, but the snow was too deep, and I stumbled. As the train approached, I could see it more clearly. A rusted, ancient locomotive, its windows shattered, and the metal twisted and scorched. I braced myself for the impact, but it never came. Instead, the train passed right through me, sending a bone-chilling cold through my body. I turned to see it continue down the tracks, disappearing into the storm. Shaking, I returned to my car and tried the engine again. This time, it roared to life, and I wasted no time getting back on the road, my heart pounding in my chest. When I finally reached home, I was too shaken to sleep. The next day, I told my friend Mark about the experience. Mark, a local history buff, was intrigued and suggested we investigate the site together. Armed with flashlights and a camera, we headed to the old railway crossing that evening. The storm had passed, leaving a calm, clear night. The tracks looked abandoned, covered in snow and rusted with age. As we walked along the line, Mark recounted the details of the accident. A collision between two trains due to a signaling error, killing dozens of passengers. Suddenly, we heard it again, the distant whistle. The air grew colder, and a light appeared down the tracks. We watched in disbelief as the same ghostly train emerged from the darkness, moving silently toward us. Mark, braver than I, stepped forward with his camera, snapping pictures. The train passed through us again, leaving us both shivering and breathless. When we reviewed the photos, we were stunned. In each shot, ghostly figures were visible, faces twisted in pain and fear, hands pressed against the windows as if pleading for help. We had captured the spirits of the victims, forever trapped on their final, tragic journey. The haunted tracks were no longer just a legend. They were a grim reminder of the lives lost and the restless souls that still wandered, seeking peace. I never took that shortcut again, and the memory of that night remained etched in my mind, a chilling testament to the power of the supernatural. The Yin and Yang Train. The Midnight Express was a train shrouded in mystery and fear. It was said to appear only once a year on a stormy night, traveling through the remote countryside. Legend had it that those who boarded the train never returned. As a journalist for a local newspaper, I had always been skeptical of such tales, but I couldn't resist the lure of a good story. This year, I decided to investigate. It was a dark and stormy night, fitting for the task at hand. I drove to the old, abandoned train station where the Midnight Express was rumored to appear. The station was in disrepair, with weeds growing through the cracks in the platform and broken windows staring like empty eyes. The air was thick with anticipation and the distant rumble of thunder. I set up my camera and waited, the rain pouring down relentlessly. Just as I was beginning to doubt the legend, a distant whistle pierced the night. My heart raced as I saw the faint glow of the train's headlight approaching. The Midnight Express emerged from the darkness, an old steam engine with an eerie, almost spectral appearance. The train slowed to a halt, its doors creaking open. Despite my fear, I boarded the train, determined to uncover the truth. The interior was surprisingly well preserved, with plush seats and dim, flickering lights. The air inside was cold, and an unsettling silence hung over everything. I took a seat and prepared my notebook and camera, ready to document whatever I encountered. As the train began to move, I noticed that I was not alone. A few other passengers were scattered throughout the train, all of them staring straight ahead, their faces devoid of emotion. I tried to strike up a conversation with the man sitting across from me, but he remained silent, his eyes empty and hollow. A shiver ran down my spine. The train moved through the night, the storm raging outside. I decided to explore the other cars, hoping to find someone willing to talk. As I walked through the train, I noticed the passengers all had the same vacant expressions. They seemed more like mannequins than living people. My unease grew with each step. In the last car, I found a conductor. He was an old man with a weathered face and piercing eyes that seemed to see right through me.
Can I help you?
He asked, his voice gravelly and cold. I told him I was a journalist investigating the Midnight Express and asked about the passengers.
They are souls trapped between this world and the next. This train is their purgatory, a place where they must confront their past sins before moving on.
I felt a chill as I realized the gravity of his words. Why am I here? I asked. The conductor's eyes darkened.
You sought the truth, and now you are part of it. You must face your own demons before you can leave.
Panic set in as I tried to leave the car, but the door wouldn't budge. The train began to feel like a prison, the walls closing in on me. I ran back to my seat, hoping to find some way out. The passengers' faces seemed to contort into grotesque masks, their eyes following my every move. Desperate, I looked out the window, but the landscape had changed. Instead of the familiar countryside, I saw scenes from my own life, moments of regret, guilt, and pain. The train was forcing me to confront my own past. As the storm outside intensified, so did my memories. I realized I had spent my life running from my mistakes, never facing the consequences of my actions. The train slowed to a stop, and the conductor appeared again.
It's time,
He said. With a deep breath, I stepped off the train and into the unknown, ready to confront my past and seek redemption. The Midnight Express disappeared into the night, leaving me alone on the platform, but no longer afraid. I had found my story, and it was one that I would carry with me forever. My name is Tom. I am the eldest child in the family and have a younger sister. That's 10-year-old Lisa, and we had to stay home alone while our parents went to a company event with their colleagues. Our house was located on the outskirts of town, surrounded by dense forest, and the nearest neighbor was at least a mile away. Lisa and I stayed up late watching movies until around midnight. We had just finished watching an episode of Friends when we heard a loud crash coming from the kitchen. We exchanged worried glances before I got up, grabbed a baseball bat, and told his sister to follow him. He didn't want to leave me alone in case something was wrong. We cautiously made our way downstairs, where I suddenly stopped, causing Lisa to bump into me. I stood frozen, staring into the kitchen. I peeked around him and saw a tall man, about 6, with a hood covering his face and a flashlight in his hand. Lisa and I panicked with the idea of finding the phone to call the police. Panicking, I grabbed Lisa's hand and dragged him back upstairs to my parents' bedroom, where the house phone was. We locked the door and called 113. I could hear the intruder's footsteps slowly approaching the stairs. Tom stayed on the phone with the police, describing our situation, while I watched the door handle turn slowly. Suddenly, the man began pounding on the door, shouting,
"Let me in! I won't hurt you, I promise."
I shouted back.
Go away! The police are on their way.
The pounding continued, and the door began to shake violently. Lisa looked at me and signaled for us to escape through the window. We opened it quietly and climbed out onto the roof, then carefully made our way down the tree next to the house. We ran into the woods and hid behind a large boulder, our hearts pounding in our chests. Minutes felt like hours as we waited. We heard the distant sound of police sirens, and soon after, saw flashing lights approaching our house. The intruder must have heard them too, because he bolted from the house and disappeared into the forest. We watched as the police arrived, and we ran out to meet them, telling them where the man had gone. The police searched the woods and eventually found the man hiding near an old shed. They arrested him, and we were relieved beyond words. The officers stayed with us until our parents returned home, shocked and grateful that we were safe. A few days later, we learned that the intruder had been wanted for several burglaries in the area. He had a history of violence, and we were lucky to have escaped unharmed. I am now 15, and the memory of that night still haunts me. Tom has since moved out for college, and our family decided to move closer to the city to feel safer. The story I want to tell next is, it was early June 2017. I was taking a road trip with my 9-year-old son Tony to West Virginia to visit family. It was a long, stressful drive. My car didn't have working AC at the time, and it was an incredibly hot day, so we were a bit stressed out. By the 6-hour mark, we had left later in the day, so we were still on the road by dark. I think it was around 9 o'clock p.m. when we were still on the road, and Tom started complaining that he needed to use the bathroom. There was already tension in the car before this, but his constant complaining brought about a slight argument between the two of us. At last, I saw a blue rest area sign zoom past us on the interstate, so I veered off into the rest area. It had a small building with 2 bathrooms, a couple of vending machines, and a few benches. That was it. There were no other cars parked nearby, besides some big white pickup truck. As I pulled up next to the building, Tom got out in a hurry and ran to the bathroom. I left the car on because I knew he'd be back soon. Like I said, I don't want to get into personal stuff like why we had a bit of an argument, but it seemed we were at that stage where we weren't exchanging words anymore. I figured the rest of the ride would be silent. About a minute later, the back door opened. I wanted to say something to Tom, but I didn't know what to say, so I just stayed quiet and drove off. I noticed that the white pickup truck parked nearby was leaving as well. I veered back onto the interstate and into the left lane, and the pickup truck did the same. I stepped on it a little, and so did he. He started flashing his lights, so I switched to the right lane thinking he was nothing but an aggressive driver. But as soon as I switched to the right, so did he. He was still flashing his lights. I pulled into the right lane and started to slow down. He sped up, still in the middle lane, and when he caught up to me, he slowed down and lowered his window. I did the same.
Hey!
And he started yelling something to me, pointing at my car. He looked like a creepy, sketchy dude at first glance. I couldn't hear a word he was saying, so he pointed for me to pull over to the side. I told Tom to keep calm. In my head, I was saying if this guy tried to do anything funny, I would floor it. The pickup pulled up behind me on the grass, and the guy came out of his truck running to my car. I put the car back in drive as my heart was racing, ready to drive, but then he screamed, "Wait!" He got to my window and said,
That's not your kid, and pointed to the back seat.
He said, "That's not your kid that got in your car." Suddenly, the back right side door opens, and I turned to see someone getting out of my car, not my son Tom. I got out from the car, screaming at the tall person who seemed to be a fully grown man, but they had already disappeared into the woods. I looked at the driver of the pickup and thanked him as I suddenly panicked, thinking about what could have happened to Tom. I got back in my car, crossed the grass between the interstate, and drove back to the rest area. The guy in the pickup followed me. We got back there in like 30 seconds to find Tom waiting outside the rest area bathroom. He got back in the car, all confused. I explained everything to him, almost out of breath, as did the pickup driver. I thanked the guy one more time before he drove back to the spot he was sitting in before. Tom was so intrigued about what just happened, and I was so disturbed that we were back on good terms again. We chatted the whole rest of the way and told family about it as soon as we arrived. I never even got to see what the person who got in my car looked like. Honestly, maybe I should be happy I never turned around to look at them because I don't know what they would have done. The Haunting of Jefferson High. Jefferson High School was an old building with a rich history. It had been around for over a century, with stories of hauntings passed down from generation to generation. As a senior, I never believed the tales until the night I decided to stay late to finish a project. It was a stormy evening, the perfect setting for a horror story. The rain pounded against the windows, and thunder rumbled in the distance. The school was eerily silent, with only the occasional creak of the old wooden floors breaking the stillness. My friend Emily had promised to stay with me, but she bailed at the last minute, leaving me alone in the dimly lit library. I was deep into my research when I heard it, a faint whisper. I looked up, scanning the rows of bookshelves, but saw nothing. Shaking it off as my imagination, I continued working. The whisper came again, louder this time, and I could make out words.
Help me.
My heart raced as I stood up, the sound seemingly coming from the far corner of the library. Clutching my phone for light, I walked towards the sound. As I neared the corner, the air grew colder, and the whispering grew more desperate. I turned the corner and saw an old, dusty book lying on the floor. The whispering stopped. "Oh." Hesitantly, I picked up the book and opened it. Inside, there were handwritten notes dating back decades, detailing the mysterious disappearance of a student named Sarah Mitchell in 1953. According to the notes, Sarah had stayed late one night to finish a project, just like me. She was last seen in the library, and rumors had it that her spirit never left. Chills ran down my spine as I read about strange occurrences reported by students over the years, books flying off shelves, cold spots, and whispers for help. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the temperature dropped even further. I turned around to leave. The library door slammed shut on its own. Panic set in as I rushed to the door, pulling with all my might, but it wouldn't budge. My phone's light flickered, and in the dim glow, I saw her. A translucent figure of a girl standing by the window, her eyes filled with sorrow.
Help me.
She whispered again, her voice echoing in the empty room. I froze, unable to move or speak. Sarah's ghost floated closer, her hand reaching out to me. In a flash, images flooded my mind. Her being locked in the library, crying for help, and eventually succumbing to despair. Summoning all my courage, I asked, "How can I help you?" Grabbing a pen, I wrote down her final words as she dictated them to me. She spoke of feeling trapped, alone, and scared, and how she longed for someone to find her. As I finished writing, the room grew warmer, and the oppressive feeling lifted. Sarah's ghost smiled faintly before fading away, leaving me alone in the now silent library. The door creaked open, and I knew she was finally at peace. The next day, I reported the incident to the school authorities, who were skeptical but intrigued. They placed the book in a display case in the library, honoring Sarah's memory. Jefferson High was still old and creaky, but from that day on, the whispers for help ceased, and Sarah Mitchell's spirit was finally free.